For years, Princess and the Princess Royal was often described as the monarchy's hardest-working figure, respected but rarely seen as a central player in the future of the institution. Yet a remarkable shift now appears to be unfolding behind palace walls, and some royal observers believe it could reveal more about King Charles III's priorities than ever before. The moment began attracting serious attention not because of a dramatic public announcement, but because of a series of decisions that seemed surprisingly consistent when viewed together. Individually, each development appeared routine, perhaps even unremarkable. Collectively, however, they painted a picture that many royal commentators could not ignore. Why was Princess, and suddenly being entrusted with responsibilities that appeared increasingly significant during one of the most challenging periods of Charles's reign? And perhaps more importantly, what did that suggest about the monarchy's future direction? At first glance, the answer might seem straightforward. King Charles III has been navigating a period unlike any experienced by a British monarch in recent decades. Public duties continue, constitutional responsibilities remain constant, and the institution itself must project stability even while confronting personal and operational challenges. Under such circumstances, trusted family members naturally become more important. Yet that explanation only addresses the surface of the story. Several royal analysts have noted that trust inside the monarchy is measured differently than trust in ordinary institutions. Public appearances matter, but private confidence matters far more. When a monarch decides who should represent the crown during sensitive moments, who should carry out responsibilities on behalf of the institution, and who should be positioned close to the center of decision-making, those choices reveal priorities that official statements often cannot. That is precisely why attention has increasingly focused on the king's sister. For decades, and built a reputation that differed dramatically from many modern public figures. While others attracted headlines through controversy, interviews, or public campaigns, the Princess Royal became known for consistency. Year after year, engagement after engagement, she maintained a pace of work that frequently exceeded that of younger members of the royal family. Yet dedication alone does not automatically translate into influence. Many hardworking individuals serve institutions faithfully without ever becoming indispensable. The question now being asked is whether and has crossed that threshold. Part of what makes the situation so intriguing is timing. Royal watchers have pointed out that this growing prominence is occurring precisely when Prince William, the Prince of Wales, faces extraordinary pressures of his own. As the future king balances public responsibilities with family priorities, the monarchy requires stability not only today but during a potentially complex transition period that could extend for years. In that environment, every decision about responsibility becomes more meaningful. Some observers believe this helps explain why Anne's role appears to be expanding. Not because anyone is replacing William or altering the line of succession, but because institutions often rely on experienced figures during periods of uncertainty. Experience creates continuity. Continuity creates confidence. And confidence, especially for a centuries-old monarchy, can be one of its most valuable assets. Yet another question quickly emerges. If this is simply about experience, why has public discussion become so intense? Why are royal commentators dedicating increasing attention to developments involving the Princess Royal? The answer may lie in what Anne represents rather than merely what she does. Unlike many figures associated with modern royal debates, Anne occupies a unique position. She possesses seniority without ambition, influence without obvious personal gain, and authority derived almost entirely from service rather than popularity campaigns. That combination is unusually powerful inside institutions, where legitimacy matters as much as visibility. According to several royal commentators, it allows her to operate in ways that few other members of the family can. Consider how differently public actions are interpreted depending on who performs them. When a future monarch assumes greater responsibility, people naturally speculate about succession. When a younger royal gains prominence, questions arise about future leadership. But when the Princess Royal steps forward, the interpretation is often different. Many see duty rather than strategy, service rather than positioning, stability rather than ambition. Whether that perception is entirely accurate almost becomes secondary. What matters is that the perception exists. That perception may also explain why Anne's relationship with both King Charles III and Prince William has become increasingly important. Reports and public appearances have repeatedly suggested a level of mutual respect that extends beyond family affection. There appears to be a shared understanding of responsibility and appreciation for institutional continuity, and perhaps even a common vision regarding what the monarchy must become in order to remain effective in a rapidly changing world. If that interpretation is correct, then Anne's growing significance tells us something larger than a story about one royal figure. It begins to reveal how the monarchy may be adapting internally to challenges that are impossible to ignore. Health concerns, public expectations, media scrutiny, constitutional responsibilities, and generational transition are all converging at the same time. Few reigns have faced quite this combination of pressures. And this is where the story becomes particularly fascinating. Because the more closely observers examine recent developments, the more they notice that Anne's rise is not connected to a single appointment, a single event, or even a single decision. Instead, it appears to be the result of years of accumulated trust gradually reaching a tipping point. The king's confidence in his sister did not emerge overnight. Neither did the respect she commands across much of the institution. What makes the current moment different is that those years of trust are now becoming visible in ways they never were before. Some royal watchers have even suggested that the monarchy may be entering a phase in which reliability becomes more valuable than symbolism. If so, Anne's position could be stronger than many people realize. But if that is true, another question immediately follows. How exactly did the Princess Royal become one of the most influential figures in the monarchy without most people noticing it happen? And as more pieces of that puzzle begin to emerge, the story becomes far bigger than anyone initially imagined. The next developments reveal why many inside royal circles believe this shift has been building for decades, and why its implications may reach far beyond Princess and herself. Reports suggesting that King Charles III may be considering an unprecedented expansion of Princess Anne's constitutional responsibilities did not remain confined to royal commentary for very long. What transformed the discussion from an intriguing palace rumor into a subject of serious national interest was the reaction that followed. The moment analysts began examining what such a move could actually mean, attention shifted away from the title itself and toward something far more consequential. Why now? That question quickly became the center of the conversation. After all, royal institutions rarely embrace significant structural changes without broader considerations operating behind the scenes. Several royal watchers observed that the discussion surrounding and appeared to emerge during a period when the monarchy was already navigating multiple transitions simultaneously, including generational change, public expectations, and the increasing visibility of Prince William as the future king. If reports were accurate, was this merely recognition of the Princess Royal's decades of service, or was it part of a larger effort to prepare the institution for future challenges? What made the speculation even more intriguing was the absence of any obvious political necessity. Traditionally, conversations about regency powers become prominent during periods of constitutional uncertainty or significant national concern. Yet commentators noted that the current debate appeared to be driven less by immediate necessity and more by long-term planning. That distinction may seem subtle, but it carries enormous implications. Planning for a crisis is one thing. Planning before a crisis emerges suggests a very different strategic mindset. Some observers believe this is precisely why the story attracted attention far beyond dedicated royal audiences. The issue was no longer whether Princess Anne deserved greater responsibility. Few questioned her commitment to duty. The larger question became whether Buckingham Palace was quietly signaling confidence in certain individuals while simultaneously revealing how it views the future leadership structure of the monarchy. As analysts explored that possibility, another interesting pattern began to emerge. While public discussion focused on and herself, some royal commentators suggested the real significance might involve Prince William. The future king has increasingly assumed a central role in shaping the monarchy's direction, and reports indicating closer strategic alignment between William and the Princess Royal naturally raised questions about institutional continuity. If Anne were being entrusted with an expanded constitutional role, what might that reveal about the people expected to guide the monarchy through the next chapter? That interpretation introduced an entirely new layer of significance. Suddenly, What appeared to be a story about one royal appointment began looking more like a story about succession planning, leadership preparation, and the preservation of institutional stability. Royal watchers pointed out that the monarchy has always relied on trusted senior figures during periods of transition. The difference now is that the transition itself no longer feels like a distant future event. It feels increasingly present. Yet another question soon emerged. If confidence in Princess, and was indeed growing, how might that affect perceptions of influence within the royal family itself? Reports suggest that senior royals are often viewed through different lenses internally than they are by the public. Popularity matters, but reliability matters more. Visibility attracts headlines, but consistency earns trust. Few members of the royal family possess Anne's reputation for unwavering service, and several commentators noted that any move elevating her role could reflect deeper institutional priorities rather than public relations considerations. That possibility helps explain why discussions intensified so rapidly. The debate was never solely about authority. It was about what qualities the monarchy appears to value most during a period of considerable change. Loyalty, stability, experience, duty. These themes appeared repeatedly throughout commentaries surrounding the reports, prompting some analysts to argue that the story may be revealing the monarchy's internal priorities more clearly than any official statement could. However, that interpretation created another complication. If the institution is emphasizing continuity and experience, what does that mean for modernization efforts that have also become a major focus of royal strategy? This apparent contradiction fascinated many observers. On one hand, the monarchy faces pressure to remain relevant in a rapidly changing society. On the other, reports surrounding Princess and seem to reinforce traditional royal values that have defined the institution for generations. Rather than conflicting, some analysts argue these objectives may actually complement one another. Modernization, they suggested, becomes easier when supported by figures whose credibility is beyond question. That theory gained traction because it connected several previously separate developments into a single narrative. William's growing leadership role, Anne's enduring reputation, the king's emphasis on stability. Together, these elements appeared less like isolated stories and more like pieces of a broader strategy taking shape beneath the surface. Even so, uncertainty remained. Royal commentators repeatedly noted that much of the discussion was being driven by interpretation rather than confirmation. Reports indicated growing interest. Palace observers identified meaningful patterns. Analysts proposed explanations. Yet the most important question still lacked a definitive answer. Was the monarchy actively preparing for a new phase of leadership, or were observers simply connecting developments that happened to occur at the same time? That uncertainty only increased public fascination. Because if these developments were connected, the implications could extend far beyond Princess and herself. They could influence perceptions of how authority is distributed within the institution, how future responsibilities are assigned, and how the monarchy intends to navigate the years ahead. What initially appeared to be a discussion about one royal role was beginning to resemble something much larger, a glimpse into how the crown may be preparing for challenges that have not yet fully emerged. And as more commentators began exploring that possibility, another question started to overshadow every other aspect of the story. If these reported discussions are truly part of a broader strategic vision, what development could be important enough to bring all of these separate threads together? The answer to that question may reveal far more than anyone expected. As that larger question began to take shape, many royal observers found themselves looking beyond the reported discussions surrounding Princess and towards something far more revealing, the pattern of trust that appears to exist inside the monarchy itself. The reason this mattered was simple. Institutions facing periods of transition rarely rely on popularity alone. They rely on individuals who have demonstrated consistency over decades. That observation may help explain why Anne's name surfaced so prominently in conversations about future responsibilities. Reports indicate that one of the most valued qualities within long-standing institutions is predictability during uncertain periods. While public attention often focuses on headline-generating personalities, internal decision-making tends to favor figures whose actions are rarely surprising. Royal commentators have suggested that this may explain why the Princess Royal occupies a unique position within the family structure. Her influence has never depended on publicity. Instead, it has been built through reliability, which becomes increasingly valuable whenever questions about the future begin attracting attention. That connection leads directly to another intriguing possibility. If stability is becoming a primary institutional concern, then discussions surrounding and may reveal less about her personal role and more about how the monarchy intends to manage future transitions. Several analysts have noted that transitions within royal institutions are rarely confined to succession alone. They involve public trust, operational continuity, constitutional responsibilities, and the ability to reassure both supporters and critics that the institution remains steady regardless of changing circumstances. Viewed through that lens, the reported interest in strengthening experienced figures begins to make more sense. Yet it also creates a new question. If preparation is underway, what specific pressures might be driving it? Some observers believe the answer may lie in the increasingly complex environment surrounding modern monarchy. Unlike previous generations, today's senior royals operate within a constant cycle of public scrutiny, social media reaction, and global commentary. Every decision is analyzed almost instantly. Every appearance carries symbolic significance. Royal watchers have pointed out that this environment places unprecedented pressure on leadership structures, making trusted support networks more important than ever before. That observation helps explain another pattern emerging from the story. Throughout recent years, the monarchy has appeared increasingly focused on a smaller core group of senior working royals. Reports suggest that efficiency, clarity, and consistency have become recurring priorities. If that interpretation is correct, then discussions involving the Princess Royal may not represent an isolated development at all. Instead, they could be part of a broader effort to ensure that key responsibilities remain concentrated among individuals viewed as highly dependable. What does that reveal? It may reveal that the monarchy is quietly prioritizing resilience. And resilience becomes especially important when leadership transitions are approaching, even if those transitions are unfolding gradually rather than suddenly. Royal commentators have noted that successful institutions often prepare years before major changes become visible to the public. The public sees individual announcements. Internally, however, preparations may begin long before anyone recognizes the larger pattern. That possibility introduces another connection that many analysts find difficult to ignore. Prince William's expanding profile, Catherine, Princess of Wales returning to a more visible role following recent challenges, and ongoing discussions surrounding experienced senior figures all appear to point toward the same underlying objective: ensuring continuity. While each development can be viewed independently, some observers argue that together they form a much clearer picture. The monarchy may already be shaping the framework through which the next generation of leadership will operate. Yet this is where the story becomes particularly interesting. Because continuity and change are often presented as opposites, when in reality they frequently occur together. Institutions survive by adapting while maintaining enough familiarity to preserve public confidence. Royal analysts have suggested that one of the monarchy's greatest challenges is balancing those two goals simultaneously. Too much change can create uncertainty. Too little change can create stagnation. The question therefore becomes whether these reported developments represent an attempt to manage both pressures at once. If they do, then the significance extends far beyond a single constitutional discussion. The focus shifts from individuals to strategy. It shifts from titles to institutional architecture. It shifts from today's headlines to tomorrow's realities. Several royal watchers have pointed out that the strongest evidence for this interpretation may actually be the reaction the story generated. Public interest was unusually intense because many people sensed there was a deeper issue underneath the surface. The reported possibility of expanded responsibilities attracted attention not simply because of what it might mean today, but because of what it might suggest about the future direction of the crown. And that future direction introduces another layer of complexity. Every monarchy must eventually answer a fundamental question. How does it remain relevant across generations while preserving the traditions that justify its existence? Reports indicate that this question increasingly influences royal decision-making. The challenge is not merely constitutional. It is cultural. It is strategic. It is deeply connected to public trust. That may explain why commentators repeatedly return to the concept of duty when discussing its role. Duty represents more than personal commitment. It symbolizes continuity between generations of royal leadership. Some analysts have argued that emphasizing such figures helps reinforce the values the institution wants associated with its future. But what if there is another reason observers are paying such close attention? What if the reported discussions are significant not because they reveal a future appointment, but because they reveal how decisions are being made behind palace walls? That possibility changes the story entirely. Rather than focusing on who receives responsibility, attention shifts toward the criteria used to allocate responsibility: experience, reliability, trust, institutional knowledge. These qualities appear repeatedly throughout commentaries surrounding the reports, suggesting that they may be carrying increasing weight during a period of gradual transformation. And if that interpretation is accurate, then one final question begins to emerge from everything discussed so far. Are observers witnessing a routine constitutional conversation, or are they seeing early evidence of a broader restructuring of how leadership responsibilities will be distributed in the years ahead? At the moment, reports provide no definitive answer. Yet the pattern is becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. Multiple developments appear connected. Multiple priorities appear aligned. Multiple decisions appear to be moving in the same direction. What remains uncertain is whether the next development will simply confirm those connections or reveal an even larger objective that has remained hidden until now. Because if the deeper purpose behind these discussions is finally exposed, everything we think we understand about this story may need to be viewed through an entirely different lens. Reports suggesting that discussions around princess and had moved beyond a simple constitutional question began generating a different kind of reaction inside royal circles. The focus was no longer centered on whether additional responsibilities might eventually be assigned. Instead, attention increasingly shifted toward what those discussions revealed about the monarchy's priorities at a particularly sensitive moment. As multiple strands of the story started converging, a growing number of commentators argued that the institution appeared to be preparing for challenges that extended well beyond any single royal appointment. What had changed was not necessarily the public information itself, but the way observers were interpreting it. Earlier developments that once appeared unrelated suddenly seemed connected by a common theme. Questions surrounding continuity, trust, succession planning, public confidence, and institutional resilience were no longer operating as separate conversations. Royal watchers pointed out that they increasingly appeared to form part of the same broader narrative. If that interpretation was correct, then the significance of Anne's reported role expanded considerably because she was no longer being viewed simply as an experienced royal figure. She was increasingly being viewed as part of a larger framework designed to ensure stability during a period of gradual transition. That shift in interpretation created new pressure. The moment discussions become linked to future leadership, expectations inevitably rise. Reports suggest that every move made by senior royals begins attracting greater scrutiny because audiences are no longer evaluating individual decisions in isolation. They begin asking how those decisions fit into a broader strategic picture. The consequence is that actions once considered routine suddenly acquire additional meaning. Even relatively modest developments become subjects of analysis because people suspect they may reveal something about the monarchy's long-term direction. Several royal commentators have noted that this dynamic appears particularly visible when examining the evolving relationship between established experience and emerging leadership. On one side stands a generation of royals whose credibility has been built over decades of service. On the other stands a future generation preparing to inherit increasing responsibility. The pressure comes from ensuring those two realities work together seamlessly. If continuity is the goal, then the process cannot appear abrupt. Yet if modernization is also a goal, then the institution cannot appear static. Managing both expectations simultaneously represents a significant leadership challenge. That challenge may help explain why reactions from observers have become increasingly important. When reporters suggest that discussions are taking place behind palace walls, public attention often focuses on the reported decision itself. Yet analysts have argued that reactions can sometimes be more revealing than the original report. The reason is simple. Reactions expose underlying concerns. In this case, many responses appeared centered on questions of preparedness. Was the monarchy preparing for future scenarios more actively than previously understood? Was a broader redistribution of responsibility already underway? Or were observers simply connecting dots that happened to align? Those questions remain unresolved, but the consequences of asking them are becoming increasingly significant. The more these themes gain attention, the more pressure shifts toward the institution's ability to demonstrate clarity. Public trust depends not only on stability, but also on confidence that leadership structures remain effective. Royal watchers have pointed out that uncertainty itself can become a challenge if it persists for too long. Consequently, every indication of careful planning tends to attract interest because it reassures some audiences while simultaneously prompting new questions from others. This is where multiple storylines begin to converge most clearly. The expanding visibility of Prince William, the continued importance of trusted senior figures, and growing discussions about long-term institutional resilience all seem connected by a shared objective. Reports indicate that the monarchy's future is increasingly being viewed through the lens of preparation rather than reaction. Instead of waiting for circumstances to force adaptation, there appears to be an emphasis on ensuring structures are already in place before they become necessary. If that reading is accurate, then another consequence emerges. The story stops being about contingency planning and starts becoming a story about confidence. Institutions prepare extensively when they intend to project certainty. They seek experienced voices when they want continuity. They strengthen leadership frameworks when they anticipate future demands. None of these actions necessarily indicate immediate change, yet together they create the impression that significant thought is being devoted to what comes next. Some observers believe that this may explain why public interest has continued growing despite the absence of definitive answers. The uncertainty itself has become part of the story. Every new report seems to raise a larger question than the one before it. Every apparent explanation opens another area of discussion. Far from reducing curiosity, additional information appears to be expanding it. At the same time, a subtle contradiction has emerged. The monarchy often seeks to project steadiness and predictability, yet the very discussions intended to reinforce those qualities can generate increased speculation. Analysts have argued that this creates a delicate balancing act. Too little transparency invites assumptions. Too much transparency can create unnecessary distractions. Navigating that tension requires careful judgment, particularly when conversations touch upon constitutional responsibilities and future leadership structures. That balancing act is now becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Royal commentators have suggested that the institution finds itself facing a period in which public expectations are evolving rapidly. Audiences want reassurance, but they also want understanding. They value tradition, yet they remain curious about modernization. They respect continuity, but they also look for evidence that the monarchy is adapting to contemporary realities. These competing expectations generate pressure not because they are incompatible, but because satisfying all of them simultaneously is extraordinarily complex. As these pressures accumulate, the implications become harder to dismiss. What initially appeared to be a discussion involving one trusted royal figure now seems connected to wider questions about authority, preparedness, leadership, and succession. The significance lies not in any single report, but in the pattern that has emerged from multiple developments. The more observers examine that pattern, the more they sense that something larger may be taking shape beneath the surface. And perhaps that is the strongest implication yet, because if all of these conversations, reactions, and reported considerations truly belong to the same broader strategy, then the next development may not simply add another piece to the puzzle. It may fundamentally change how the entire puzzle is understood. What remains uncertain is whether observers are witnessing careful preparation for the future, or the early stages of a transformation whose full significance has yet to become visible. Either way, the evidence increasingly suggests that the decisive revelation may now be closer than ever before. As the various strands of the story finally come into focus, the most important conclusion may be the one that was easiest to overlook at the beginning. Reports surrounding the possibility of princess and assuming an even more significant constitutional role were never truly important because of the title itself. What captured the attention of royal observers was what those discussions appeared to reveal about the institution's priorities, its concerns, and its vision for the years ahead. In many ways, the conversation evolved from a question about one individual into a question about the monarchy itself. Throughout the story, commentators repeatedly return to themes of continuity, preparation, and public confidence. Those themes matter because constitutional monarchies depend on something that is often difficult to measure yet impossible to replace: trust. The public must believe that the institution can function effectively through periods of uncertainty, leadership transitions, changing public expectations, and unforeseen challenges. Reports suggesting expanded responsibilities for one of the monarchy's most respected and experienced figures naturally attracted attention because they touched directly upon that question. What has gradually emerged is a broader understanding of why these developments resonated so strongly. Royal commentators have noted that modern monarchies face a unique challenge. They must preserve centuries of tradition while simultaneously adapting to contemporary realities. Too much change can create concerns about losing identity. Too little change can create concerns about relevance. The most successful periods in royal history often occur when institutions manage to balance both objectives at the same time. Some observers believe that the discussions surrounding Princess and reflect precisely that balancing process. The significance, therefore, extends beyond constitutional procedure. Reports indicate that public attention increasingly focuses on leadership preparation rather than leadership succession alone. There is an important difference between those concepts. Succession concerns who eventually assumes responsibility. Preparation concerns whether the institution is ready long before that moment arrives. Royal watchers have pointed out that effective institutions rarely wait for major transitions before developing supporting structures. They prepare gradually, carefully, and often quietly. Viewed through that lens, the reported discussions become less about immediate circumstances and more about long-term resilience. That interpretation introduces another layer of meaning. The growing prominence of trusted senior royals may reflect an understanding that experience remains one of the monarchy's most valuable assets. In an era characterized by rapid change, established credibility carries unusual weight. Public trust is not built overnight. It develops over decades through consistency, reliability, and visible commitment to duty. Princess Anne's reputation has frequently been associated with precisely those qualities, which may help explain why her name generated such sustained interest whenever questions about institutional stability emerged. Yet the story also points toward the future rather than the past. Analysts have suggested that the most revealing aspect of recent discussions is not what they say about today's monarchy, but what they suggest about tomorrow's monarchy. Increasingly, public conversations appear centered on how responsibility will be distributed, how leadership will evolve, and how future generations of royals will navigate expectations that continue changing. These questions are not unique to one reign. They are part of a broader process through which institutions adapt while preserving continuity. That may explain why so many observers view these developments as part of a larger pattern. The individual reports, reactions, and interpretations examined throughout the story begin to look different when considered together. Rather than isolated events, they resemble indicators of a monarchy focused on long-term strategic evolution. The institution appears increasingly aware that public confidence depends not merely on responding effectively to present circumstances, but on demonstrating readiness for future ones. Whether through careful planning, measured delegation, or the visible involvement of trusted figures, the underlying objective seems remarkably consistent: preserving stability during a period of gradual transformation. And transformation may ultimately be the most important word in this entire discussion. Not transformation in the sense of abandoning tradition, but transformation in the sense of adapting tradition to new realities. Royal commentators have often observed that the monarchy's greatest strength has been its ability to evolve without appearing revolutionary. Major changes are rarely announced as dramatic departures from the past. Instead, they emerge through a series of decisions that seem incremental when viewed individually, but significant when viewed collectively. Some observers believe that current developments fit comfortably within that historical pattern. If that assessment is correct, then the larger meaning of this story becomes clearer. This was never simply about whether Princess Anne might receive additional constitutional recognition. It was about how institutions prepare for uncertainty. It was about how leadership is strengthened before it becomes necessary. It was about how public trust is protected during periods of transition. Most importantly, It was about the mechanisms through which continuity is maintained while the future gradually approaches. Royal watchers have pointed out that history often identifies turning points only in retrospect. Moments that appear routine in the present sometimes acquire greater significance years later, once their broader context becomes visible. That does not mean every development represents a historic shift. However, it does explain why experienced observers pay close attention whenever discussions begin touching upon themes of responsibility, succession, preparedness, and institutional confidence. By this stage, the immediate story may feel clearer than it did at the beginning. Yet the broader questions remain open. How should a modern monarchy balance tradition with adaptation? How should leadership responsibilities evolve as circumstances change? How can public confidence be preserved across generations while expectations continue shifting? These are not questions that can be answered through a single announcement or a single decision. They are ongoing challenges that every institution must confront in its own way. Perhaps that is the deepest insight revealed by this entire story. The reported discussions surrounding Princess and ultimately matter not because they provide certainty about the future, but because they offer a glimpse into how the monarchy may be preparing for it. They suggest an institution thinking carefully about continuity, responsibility, and resilience at a moment when all three carry unusual significance. And that leaves us with one final question worth considering. Will history remember these discussions as a routine constitutional conversation involving one of the monarchy's most respected figures? Or will future generations look back on them as an early sign of a broader transformation already taking shape beneath the surface of royal life? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the royal family, Prince William, Catherine, Princess of Wales, King Charles III, Princess, and the future of the monarchy, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next royal analysis. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you in the next video.